Joining me today is Steve Geller, who's the Executive Director of the Southeastern Vermont Community Action. SEVCA, that's the easier. That's easier to say.
A lot easier when you pick up the phone. Yeah.
So tell me, just describe a little bit the different things that you do, and your mission, sort of around those.
Well, we were established as part of the War on Poverty in 1965, so this is our banner 50th year of operating. And we were created as an anti-poverty agency to help people cope with the hardships of poverty, help them stabilize their lives, and ideally help people move out of poverty and work with communities to help reduce the existence of poverty to the extent that is possible. And so in that context, we provide a variety of services that work at one of those pieces of the puzzle. We help people, mitigate people's hardships, help them get fuel and pay their rent, and get pay for transportation or health care. We help them with jobs and training. We help the kids with education to try to get the next generation out of poverty. A whole variety of things that work at one of the parts of the spectrum of getting people out of poverty eventually.
So let's step back for a second. I want to make sure I understand what are the pieces that you see fit together that cause the cycle of poverty to continue for a family.
It's very complex. Poverty is, a very complicated thing. It has pieces of the society and the opportunities that provides. Of course, the overall economy that affects everybody and almost always affects people who are struggling in poverty the most because they have the most to lose and no resources to back them up. It works at getting people to get training to try to get out of poverty because the lack of knowledge, education, skills is a primary factor in people not being able to bridge that gap, in getting to the point where they can earn a livable wage to really support themselves and their families. And so we're looking at the environmental issues, the high cost of housing themselves and their families, the cost of food, the basic necessities as one factor, and then the ability for people to pay for them by having a decent income. The whole issue of livable wage is enormously relevant because even when people are working and struggling and scraping as much as they can get together, if they're not making a wage that will support themselves and their families, it's all to no avail.
I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to pick up on the livable wage.
Sure.
What do you see as sort of how the wage spectrum where it ought to start? What's the minimum wage that we ought to look at in Vermont and New Hampshire?
Well, the easiest way to put that is a lot more than it is now. Vermont has gotten a little bit further than New Hampshire has, and I've worked in both places in this field. I agonize over the fact that that New Hampshire still hasn't gone beyond the federal minimum wage. Vermont has tried to make some strides in that direction, but even that's not close. The livable wage, according to a lot of experts in the field, is in the range of $17 to $19 to $20 an hour.
Is that for an individual, for a family?
Well, that's part of why it's complicated, because it depends on how many people are in the household. It's a single job is supporting, how many hours they're working. So just the number of the amount of dollars per hour doesn't tell you the story, because if they only can get a part-time job, then it's not a full-time livable income. It depends on what benefits they're getting with it. So if they get health care, which is a huge expense for so many families, they can afford to get paid less in hourly wages. If they don't have health care, then they have to take that out of their income, and they need a higher livable wage. So it runs the gamut. It can go in some studies as high as $25 an hour if there are no benefits associated with it. But what we do know is that the minimum wage in the majority of states and localities is not even close to what people need to make a living. The president said it the other night. He said, try to, if you think you can live on what the minimum wage is in this country for, and feed a family and house a family, go ahead and try it. And he was setting out a challenge to people who scoff at the idea that we need that. He said, I'd like to see you walk a mile in those shoes and tell me that you can live on that kind of income. And you really can't, is the truth behind it.
So we're out of time in this segment, but we're going to continue our conversation, so please stay with us.